Did you know that the transnational global mega companies that are creating the vaccine for COVID also created the drugs that led to an opioid epidemic, killing as many people in America as have died as a result of coronavirus? Let's have a look at the opioid crisis and the pharmaceutical industry in general.
Health officials are warning of something called syndemic, two epidemics happening at once.
Of course, we know about the coronavirus pandemic, but the opioid crisis is also on track to claim an unprecedented number of lives.
A new study indicates that the opioid crisis in the US is deepening, with overdoses 29% higher than before the pandemic. According to the latest research based on 190 million emergency department visits, the opioid epidemic is growing in strength and taking advantage of a society now more susceptible to addiction than ever.
The American Medical Association says at least 30 states have reported overdose deaths rising in 2020.
More than 400,000 Americans are estimated to have died during the opioid epidemic that spanned the last couple of decades. How did it start? And which transnational pharmaceutical companies participated in the creation and proliferation of the drugs that caused it?
A judge in Oklahoma ordering Johnson & Johnson to pay $572 million for aggressively marketing addictive painkillers to doctors and to patients.
The thing is with addictive substances, you don't need to aggressively market them. Just put them down. They'll find their market.
This Oklahoma judge has decided that corporate giant Johnson & Johnson helped fuel opioid addictions in his state.
What? Johnson & Johnson? No more tears? Baby products? Good old Johnson & Johnson?
The state blamed Johnson & Johnson for misleading marketing to doctors and patients that the state says downplayed the risks.
Johnson & Johnson were accused of a cunning, cynical and deceitful scheme. That's the worst kind of scheme that anyone can come up with. So this cunning and cynical, deceitful scheme was to ramp up narcotic painkiller sales as one of a web of firms that created the biggest drug epidemic in American history. As profits surged, the companies worked in step to change medical culture and practice by influencing doctors, researchers, federal regulators and politicians. The $572 million fine was well below what some investors and analysts feared in what had been a $17 billion lawsuit. The firm's shares rose by 5% in extended trading following the decision. So the result of that fine was that the share price rose, probably sufficiently to accommodate that kind of loss. So I guess what this indicates is that we're creating systems that are going to lead to malpractice. They're going to lead to negative consequences. Take the opioid crisis as an example, even though it's serious enough if it were an anomaly. It shows that the incentive for profit is so strong that it overrides all other considerations, like whether or not the drugs are so addictive that it kills people.
COVID-19 is here. It will be here for some time, but in a year or two, it's the opioid use disorder epidemic that'll still be with us.
I suppose because the opioid epidemic indicates a great deal of social dissatisfaction, breakdown of community, breakdown of mental health, loss of hope, alienation. It's a much clearer marker of the problems America faces than the pandemic, which is a peculiar anomaly. The opioid crisis, you can trace its roots, you can trace its creation, not only to certain medical conditions, but to social conditions, to economic conditions, to corporate conditions and the way that the culture is run.
48 states and more than 2,000 local and tribal governments have now sued drug makers.
In terms of legal consequences for these companies that are charged with such significant jobs, the Johnson & Johnson case was followed by another wave of revelations which brought into focus how other pharmaceutical firms rushed in to exploit what grew into an $8 billion a year industry, showing that a raft of corporations flooded the country with more than 75 billion opioid pills in just 6 years and targeted regions already worst hit by the epidemic. Because I suppose if you're approaching it from a marketing perspective, those areas are where there's a market, rather than, oh God, there's a terrible crisis there. What is regarded as a crisis for some is an opportunity for others. And as long as that is the prevailing mentality, these kind of problems will be perpetuated.
We should point out that there are at least 2 other pharmaceutical companies that have settled with the state of Oklahoma for millions upon millions of dollars. All of them face multiple lawsuits across the country.
They made false claims for the safety of the drugs, not least in manipulating scientific papers to promote the spurious assertions that there was a less than 1% risk of addiction from narcotic painkillers. The manufacturers funded academic studies that hewed their way and doctor training that emphasized opioids as the default treatment for pain. When money is invested on skewing studies and papers, you create the conditions for cynicism and suspicion in other areas of medicine, because you can literally point to these events and say, well, look, when it came to the opioids, they were able to manipulate the evidence. They were able to just pay manageable fines and see their share prices surge back to values that meant it could easily be accommodated. How can we trust them? How can we trust these companies? How can we trust this mentality?
Janssen Pharmaceuticals told CBS News in a statement that the state's allegations are baseless and unsubstantiated. We acted responsibly in providing FDA-approved pain medications, the company said.
Much of the influence they asserted was done through lobbying and the funding of medical societies. The industry provides much of the FDA's income through the fees it pays for drug approvals. Therefore, the FDA is to a degree funded by the pharmaceutical companies that it's supposed to regulate, which obviously represents a conflict of interest. This is what I mean by systemic corruption.
Johnson & Johnson points out that the FDA-approved labels of these medicines provide clear information about their risks and benefits.
What's the point of having a regulatory body that doesn't regulate practices that are this nefarious? That requires significant change. Whether you have a Democratic government or a Republican government is not going to affect that entire area of political and social life. So in that regard, at least, it means that the political process is redundant or irrelevant.
Johnson & Johnson set to deliver 4 million doses of its vaccine this week.
This week, Johnson & Johnson's COVID-19 vaccine was authorised by the FDA.
The FDA's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices recommending the vaccine for people 18 and older.
A report from Global Justice Now looked at the track record of 7 corporations hoping to produce vaccines. 6 of these giants made a combined revenue of $266 billion last year, with profits of $46 billion.
Johnson & Johnson is going to be a game changer.
For many of the corporations researching COVID vaccines, the virus has created an opportunity which cannot only be measured in soaring share price or anticipated profits. Rather, they're looking to the virus to rejuvenate the public image of this most unloved of business sectors. The problem is that companies that have behaved in a demonstrably irresponsible manner are now charged with solving a global pandemic. What ethics will they bring to the challenge that they're facing now? You can certainly understand why some people would have doubt and uncertainty about the agenda and objectives of Big Pharma when so palpably they are driven by profit.
Drug maker AstraZeneca teaming up with Oxford University.
Under the agreement with Oxford, the British drug giant will be responsible for development and worldwide manufacturing and distribution.
The vaccine developed by Oxford University was to be produced on a non-exclusive, royalty-free basis. The director of Oxford's Jenner Institute told the media, "I personally don't believe that in a time of pandemic there should be exclusive licenses." However, the Gates Foundation pushed the University of Oxford to deliver its vaccine to a partnership with AstraZeneca. This changed the university's distribution model from an open license platform to an exclusive license controlled by AstraZeneca. That shows you that the same mentality is in play. This is not querying the efficacy of the vaccine or commenting on the pharmaceutical or medical aspect of the vaccination program, merely the ideological drives that exist in these companies, demonstrable from the outcome of court cases that have already taken place and are a matter of public record.
Imagine for a moment popping a pill before bed that costs about $13.50. Now imagine waking up the next morning to find that the price of the exact same pill jumped to $750 overnight.
Other famous cases from Pfizer: in 2013, the price of an anti-epilepsy drug was increased from £2.83 per packet to 67 quid per packet. That's an extraordinary jump in price.
So far this year, drug companies have raised prices on 263 medications by an average of nearly 8%, with many patients choosing to go without.
Nearly 10,000 women filed lawsuits against Pfizer after the drug Prempro caused serious health risks and was linked to breast cancer. The claims were settled for $1 billion. GlaxoSmithKline was fined $3 billion after admitting giving kickbacks to doctors and encouraging the prescription of antidepressants to children. Apparently doctors were taken away and given fancy holidays and stuff like that. I mean, the whole thing sounds like when you hear mad stories of like 100 years ago, corruption in developing nations. It's happening now in Anglophonic countries that claim to be at the zenith of civilized achievement.
Johnson & Johnson did not cause the opioid abuse crisis here in Oklahoma or anywhere in this country.
In the interests of balance, let's see what Johnson & Johnson say for themselves in the form of their advert, just in case I'm being unfair and biased.
When you're the oldest baby company in the world.
That's a weird image, isn't it? I don't like to think of an old baby, some little Benjamin bag. Hey, can I get a little bit of that old titty milk, mama? No, you'll have this powdered milk. Makes more economic sense.
You learned something important. Babies grow up.
Not necessarily. Not if you give them enough OxyContin.
They fall down. They have fevers. They break bones.
I hate this advert. This kid's having a hell of a time, isn't it? Sit still.
Some develop acne, allergies, and nearsightedness.
Look, what you seem to be saying, Johnson & Johnson, and I get it, is you're fucked. You need Johnson & Johnson. You're going to have a fever. You're going to tumble out of a tree. You're spotty as all hell. Johnson & Johnson's your answer.
They need to be stitched up.
Oh, we're being stitched up, all right.
They have ups and downs and babies of their own.
I think one of the things I most object to when it comes to the old corporate world is their willingness to mobilise beautiful, poetic, romantic, dramatic ideas in order that they may sell. All of these ideas in this advert, community, caring about children, the troubles and difficulties of puberty and adolescence, these are all real things. But continually they're trying to direct the flow of your attention and the flow of your money towards Johnson & Johnson as a solution. I mean, I suppose what it is it's insulting, isn't it? It's insulting they're doing that after their role in the opioid crisis. In fact, the only reason they need to make that advert is to wash away the redolence of all of our shared memories of the irresponsible way that they have promoted dangerous drugs to vulnerable people in order to make money. And this ain't what I'm saying. This is the result of court findings. These are the result of convictions. These are results of payouts that they've had to make. And again, you know, Johnson & Johnson, the people that made these adverts, the people that are working in accounts, even the people, the CEOs and the people involved, all human beings like you, like me, born, live, gonna die. The systems themselves are what need to change. I suppose speaking as a drug addict, I know how I behave. I just take drugs, I just do stuff. I need alternative principles, alternative ideas to intervene with my appetites and tendencies around drugs, or I'll take drugs in an irresponsible way. Johnson & Johnson are like a drug addict living in a world where drugs are freely available and no one's mentioning that your drug addiction has consequences for yourself and others.
Sometimes they go to dark places and need help getting back.
Act as if it's Johnson & Johnson and Jesus.
Help you back from strokes. And make every chapter of your life the best it can be.
We don't mind. You can be gay, you can be old, you can be any colour you want to be. Johnson & Johnson, we will push OxyContin or some other highly charged opiate on you if we think there's a penny in it.
And from the day you're born, we never stop taking care of you.
And by care, we mean advantage. I suppose what we can learn from the opioid crisis is that a situation that was already bad, i.e. mental illness and addiction, was exacerbated by the agenda of certain transnational corporations aided by an impotent FDA and a government unwilling to intervene in the practices of big businesses. And I suppose it's interesting that these very same companies are now charged with solving the biggest problem that the world has seen for some time in the form of this pandemic. How is it that the same companies can generate 400,000 deaths from an opioid crisis and can then be charged with resolving a crisis that has led to 500,000 deaths in America, how can you use the same mentality and the same individuals and the same organisation to solve that problem? And if there is an answer to that, if that is something that can be done, at least you can be sympathetic when people have got doubts and fears, not only about the vaccine, but about the power of these organisations and the manner in which they practice. If you've got any comments, then put them there, because we read them and respond to them. Also, please like this video and subscribe to it, and please subscribe to my mailing list, what I'm calling an elite cabal alliance. Just sign up to it there. Also, I've got a new book coming out, Revelation. You can pre-order it, the link is there. But please sign up to the mailing list alliance. We're not sure quite what to call it, in case I ever need direct connection with you.